it is my pleasure to introduce Raghavji here. Today is the 18th chapter of our Kala Evam Adhyatm. So it is great, with great satisfaction, I'm introducing Raghavji here today. Raghavji is a visionary leader and he has very diverse background. And he who is an accomplished professional with a wealth of experience in both in the corporate and public sector. With 17 years of corporate expertise, Raghavji has led cross-functional creative product development teams, excelled in learning design, and championed in organizational cultural initiatives. During his tenure as a development director at Electronic Arts, Raghavji spearheaded product operation for EA's mobile game development studio, leaving a lasting impact on the company's success and innovation. However, Raghavji's passion for driving position change didn't end with his corporate career. Recognizing the pressing needs of India's governance, he transitioned into public policy, seeking direct engagement with crucial issues affecting the nation. As a co-founder and associate dean academics at Rastam School of Public Leadership, he played a pivotal role in nurturing the next generation of leaders and empowering them with the skills necessary to tackle complex challenges. Currently, Raghavji serves as a co-founder and CEO of Brihat Foundation, an organization with profound focus on culture, creatives, public policy, and leadership development. Through this venture, he continues to bridge the gap between innovation, creativity, and social impact, shaping a brighter future of communities and societies at large. As we embrace future filled with challenges and opportunities, Raghavji's wealth of knowledge and visionary leadership inspire us to envision a world that fosters creativity, inclusivity, and lasting progress. We eagerly look forward to witnessing the continued impact of his initiative as he works tirelessly to shape a better world for all. With this beautiful introduction, I welcome Raghavji to share his thought on Sri Aurobindo's vision of art. Please, Raghavji. Thank you.
Namaste. Namaste, Kiranji. Namaste, Beluji. Namaste to everyone. The honor is mine. I think introductions are always flattering, but I do not consider myself worthy neither of the Fulsome Prize nor to actually speak from a position of knowledge or authority on Sri Aurobindo's life and vision. We can always only approach Sri Aurobindo as seekers, as parts of that being and part of the presence that he seeks to create, waiting for us on the horizons of future noons. And if we can evolve into what the work that he's created for us, then I think all of us collectively will achieve what Kiranji just mentioned. So with that qualification, if you will, that we don't speak from a position of authority. We speak, particularly Sri Aurobindo's presence looms large over my life, over the work that we've done before, and definitely over the work that we do at Brihat. In fact, we have an entire series called the Fire Keepers of Civilization. And the first Rishi from an Indian nationalism school of thought that we've considered and that we've tried to bring into public consciousness is the Sri Aurobindo School of Bhavani-Bharati, along with Swami Vivekananda School of Hindu Renaissance. So our work is around understanding Sri Aurobindo's vision for future collectively, but at the same time also look at it as a means of transformation personally. I'll try and bring both of these together into a conversation on Kala and Adhyatma. And I'm particularly delighted, and I must, and I can see Beluji's signature stamp all over this and Kiranji's spirit, that this idea of art as the means of transformation is something that is absolutely underrepresented in public discourse. We've made public policy, we've made public leadership, we've made the entire architecture of what governs us into a dull and very lifeless kind of pursuit. and we've forgotten the primary impulse of human in pursuing art and why that is critical to public governance. It's not just as a means of transformation for the self, but also as a means for creating beauty around us. If there is no effort or no prospect of creating beauty in all life forms, whether it is governance, whether it is personal pursuit, whether it is your sadhana, then there is really nothing that differentiates the Indian civilization from the rest of civilizations. We are, in fact, not just harbingers, but also absolutely obsessed with beauty. And Sri Aurobindo reflects on this in his response to the colonial critique of Indian art, when he talks about nature as bounty, and nature doesn't love a vacuum. Prakriti creates. And it is in that spirit that he talks to us about art. There are many, many ways in which that we can approach this, and I'll try and cover some perspectives. Of course, trying to speak about Sri Aurobindo in an hour, trying to cover his vision for art and Adhyatma is like trying to fill an ocean in a bottle. But we must attempt and endeavor to make a start somewhere and progress. If I can, I have a few slides that I would like to walk everyone through. If it's okay, I can just share my screen. Is everyone able to see this? Sure. So I aim to finish this in about 40 minutes, and then maybe if there are any reflections or thoughts, we can discuss that for 10 minutes, and that should take us to 8 p.m. My work at Brihat Educational Trust is in 3 areas: the Dharma Drishti, the action for Dharma, and the direction, which is the policy work. All of this is embedded into the paradigm that we call the Indian knowledge systems, and how education in Bharat should now be influenced, inspired, and informed by the Indian knowledge systems. That's part of our work. We work with the government, we work with academic leaders, we work with industry leaders. I hope to work with parents and definitely work with all the young learners out there to try and inspire them about not just the greatness, but the absolute relevance of Indian knowledge systems and Indian culture. And that is how I became associated with Auro University as well, as part of shared vision. How do we approach an ocean like Sri Aurobindo? There are many, many entry points. Like I said, a younger version of me approached Sri Aurobindo as somebody who was a rebel and who went and accessed Vedas directly. And I thought I understood him then when I read The Secret of Veda many years ago. And that was just girlish, right? Because that was me trying to project what I like about myself onto a rishi. But he's so many things at once, and that's okay. It is okay to stumble upon Sri Aurobindo from any dimension. You can look at him as the freedom fighter who challenged the might of the British Empire intellectually before the spiritual journey and before the transformation of consciousness at a planetary scale that he attempted and he delivered for us. He was also a leading intellectual of the times who gave a response to the colonial empire building process. He is, of course, the poet who brings us the poetic expression to the divine whispers. He is the writer and linguist who elevated English language. And it's very important because he stood at the cusp of that change in the Yuga. And he had to deal with a mighty force. He had to deal with the prospect of arising another one, which was sleeping. And therefore, he's in many ways the Yuga Parivartana Rishi, if you were to look at it from our perspective. He's also the person who decoded the Vedic secrets for us directly. And he showed us a path of trying to understand the deepest psychological and the mystical elements of our source texts in a way that we can understand and relate to in our current age of intellect and cognitive dominance, if you will. He is, of course, a drashta himself, and he is the yogi who synthesized all the forms of knowledge that we had available from the tradition. And this synthesis, when we talk about the integral yoga or the synthesis of yoga, it is, we can look at it in multiple ways. We can look at it as the synthesis of all the margas, all the paths of realization, of bhakti, of jnana, of karma. You can look at it as the entire realization of the Panchakosha within yourself, all the way from Mooladhara to Ananda. You can look at synthesis of yoga as that. You can also look at the synthesis of yoga as the four avasthas, right? Your nidra, your swapna, your sushupti, your tulya, a synthesis of all of that. So to understand Sri Aurobindo, I think the first requirement, even before we get into his thoughts about Kala and Adhyatma, is to realize that this is an ocean that you can sit on the banks of and drink a sip, but there is no restriction on the entry point. Regardless of what our entry point is and our current level of consciousness is, we can and should approach Sri Aurobindo, and he will take us to the other side. And that is how I look at Sri Aurobindo now, a bit more sober, not as radically involved with myself as I was all those years ago. Essentially, he was a visionary spiritual master ahead of time. Sri Aurobindo is not in the past for me, and I'm sure that's something that most of us here resonate with. Sri Aurobindo is waiting for us in the future. He is waiting for us to evolve. He is asking us to rise up, and he's just not giving us the polemic. He's created the consciousness for the planet to receive the divine. And that is the process that he talks about as evolution. And he is calling the idea of Chaitya Purusha within us to come and take the mantle that he's created for us. So he's a guru who is enlightening millions. And I think we are only beginning to see the dawn that will take us to the noon of the future that Sri Aurobindo spoke about. So that is the Vibhuti. But before we get into specifics of what Sri Aurobindo had to say on poetry, on prose, on art and nationalism, maybe we can look at one or two signifiers. Sri Aurobindo always, for me personally, I've had this experience so many times that but I've still not stopped experiencing wonder. Every time I am jostling with a question or a thought or an idea or a conflict in my own mind, almost magically, it appears to me that there is a Sri Aurobindo quote which has already addressed that. It has happened to me so many times that I take it as granted today. So when we think about art and spirituality, we can think about some statements from Sri Aurobindo to get us started. So he talks about music, painting, poetry, and many other creative artistic activities which are of the mind and vital can only be a part of spiritual development or of the work of a spiritual purpose. So he's fixing the goal of this pursuit. It is not indulgence. It is not mere self-expression. It is a part of transcendence. So that is the sadhana. That is the idea of the very purpose of art itself. Then he talks about the state in which art can be created, or the state in which the experiencer or the seer is open to receive the beauty. And here we can see the spiritual idea of yogic chittabhumi. And it comes to us in the work of Ananda Kumaraswamy, who writes about this extensively. Sri Aurobindo refers to his work in his critique and his response to the Western critique. We can also see this as the work of Sri Ram Swarupji from the Voice of India tradition, who talks about the yogic chittabhumis as the means to understand different parts of the world religions. So Sri Aurobindo is looking at art not as just an aesthetic pursuit, while that is central in the purpose of creating beauty. It is also a vehicle for elevation of the yogic chittabhumi. So it is, when he says all life is yoga, art, of course, is both a primary means and an essential part of that. He talks about the literary man, and I think this is critical because the education philosophy in India and the cultural thrust that we have today is excessively intellectual, and it values the shibboleths of intellect more than the true calling of a soul. And here he is responding directly to that when he talks about literary pursuits. He is in a way characterizing and explaining the difference between the idea of philosophy versus idea of darshana. In the Indian philosophical tradition, and it comes to us most beautifully and most evocatively in Sri Aurobindo's words, knowledge cannot be asymptomatic. It cannot be divorced from behavior. Knowledge is behavioral. So if you're a literary man, it is not a pursuit of the books. It is not a pursuit of what you think is knowledge. It is valuable in the Indian philosophy, in the Indian culture, in the Indian society, only if it has a spiritual aim and a spiritual expression. Only if you use all of that knowledge in the purpose of a larger prospect, that you see the society responding to you, that you see beauty coming out of you that endures. And he talks about harmonizing, and he talks about harmony as the ultimate virtue in his writings. The use of your writing is to keep you in touch with that inner source of inspiration and intuition, so as to wear thin the crude external crust in the consciousness and encourage the growth of the inner being. So this idea of Chaitya Purusha, the all-pervading potentiality that is inside of us, and how art, yoga, everything else is a means to get to that, is a central idea that we get from Sri Aurobindo, whether he's writing about art or nationalism or the mystical expositions on Vedas or the synthesis of yoga. Specifically onto a few elements of art and how he explains the true purpose of any kind of art. In this case, I'm only using a few forms of literary ideas. But the purpose of art overall has already been fixated for us by Sri Aurobindo. And when he talks about poetry, says poetry, or at any rate, truly poetic poetry, comes always from some subtle plane through the creative vital and uses the outer mind and the external instruments for transmission only. And I think we should reflect on this to understand the link between art and Adhyatma, between Kala and Adhyatma. We're talking about the receptacle being refined. It talks about the human instrument as the receptacle to actually get the flow and be an articulator for that. And this is consistent with the Indian tradition or the Indian philosophy of communication or the Indian philosophy of grammar, coming all the way from Bhartrhari to Abhinavagupta to Sri Aurobindo. There is, and I think it's useful to contrast this with the Western theory of communication just to understand. In the Western tradition of communication, particularly in the last 100, 150 years, you would see two distinct schools or two distinct views on communication, but they converge on the purpose. One view is that it is a process school of communication, that there is a certain process to communication, and that process is used as a means to manipulate. And we must understand the psyche that this kind of goal fixation comes from, because all these theories were developed during and immediately after the World Wars, particularly the Second World War, where communication or the vak or the idea of word itself became a means or a tool for war. So this, this current cultural trend that we see of narrative wars, the kind of social media discourse that we experience every day, has its origins in the way communication has been conceived, during and after the Second World War. The second idea coming to us from the Western tradition of communication, apart from the process idea, is the semiotic school of communication. That comes to us from the Marxist view, where they look at the relational aspects of communication, trying to seek and find and use whatever they find through that goal setting as a means for establishing oppression. So communication becomes a means to locate who is oppressing whom. So both these schools, regardless of whether they're coming from one side of the Iron Curtain or the other, you notice that there is a convergence in the goal, which is to manipulate the receiver. But the Indian school of communication, before we talk about poetry, before we talk about Adhyatma, the philosophical school of communication talks about 4 layers through which we utter our words. The highest level is para, which is beyond the realm of our cognition through the senses that we have. And there is pashyanti, there is madhyama, and finally what is spoken is the vaikhari, or the spoken word. And Sri Aurobindo is pointing to that architecture where he says you actually receive it through a subtle plane, through the creative and vital uses of the outer mind, and you use the external instrument for transmission only. So there is a profound philosophical tradition and a theory of communication that Sri Aurobindo is pointing us to. It's not just, of course, the force of Sri Aurobindo's great vision and great intellect, but this is a quintessential and characteristic Indian tradition. And I think that's something that we should recognize. And he talks about this when he refers and alludes to the three elements in the production of poetry. He says that there is the original source of inspiration. Think of it as the para, when in an elevated state of consciousness, you download. And I'm sure all of us have had this experience ourselves. There are those moments of inspiration where everything, an idea, the way the idea has to be executed, the way the idea has to be marketed, the person who should be doing it, everything seems to be downloading to us in an instant. There is nothing left out. All of the details are available to us. That is the kind of receptacle that Sri Aurobindo is asking us to become. But he does say himself that it's very rare. And that was his life's work, to actually prepare us to become capable of receiving that, while also working at the level of descending or bringing down the highest level of consciousness in a way that is accessible to us. Then there is the vital force of creative beauty. And here there is an agency. There is a human agency that you can actually refine. And that is the spiritual refinement. That is the link between Kala and Adhyatma. One level is rising up your Chittabhumi to a state where it becomes just a pure receptacle. The other dimension is where you harness your creative and vital potential to make sure that what you receive is not distorted because your instrument is inadequate. So it's simultaneously asking us to prepare both at the mystical realm, but also at the realm of your mind-body energy complex. There is also, of course, the art of transmitting what we receive. And there he gives more agency to us while also giving us the responsibility that it is here that most ideas can and do get contorted. Even if what you receive is pristine, if you haven't worked on the sadhana, if that hasn't gone through the idea of swadhyaya, of a state of nididhyasana, if you were to look at the Vedantic method of pedagogy, if that does not happen, then the expression does not match. Because, and he writes about this, he says the idea when it descends chooses its language. It already is encoded in that. So it does not matter what your language is. It's not so much the language. It is just the flow of the transmission and whether that is flowing through you in all its purity. And this is what he says is the highest poetry. When he talks about art as spirituality, says there is the transcendent and immanent force, and we become the vehicles for that. Our human body is the instrument through which it is expressed, and evolving ourselves to a level where we can actually become that receptacle and let it flow through us is the yoga. So that is very clear. And he talks about poetry and he gives us very specific and characteristically sharp definitions of what poetry is. Says poetry results from the natural and predestined blending of great matter with great verse or beautiful case with beautiful verse. Beauty and aesthetic pursuit, which is what art is really about, is always a central theme in his works. And that we get from everything that we see in Mother's work, in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. The true poetry goes beyond a striking phrase or a musical sound. It is harmony of word, thought, and emotion. Manasa, vacha, karmana. And this is, once again, he is telling us the core central idea of the Vedic yajna. And Vedic yajna, from which spawns the idea of Bharatanatyam or any other dance form, which is also an expression of Trikarana Shuddhi, Manasa, Vacha, Karmana, where the thought, word, and deed are in perfect alignment. And that is the source and also the destination of all of Indian arts, is to try and go back or try and recreate or try and touch that primordial that undisturbed flow between all the elements that make us, which is what yajna is. There is the reception or the rishis, the drastas who are able to tap into the words and sounds that the universe is made up of. Then there is the actual invocation of that, and then there is the act of the key that is being offered. So the thought, word, and deed are in perfect alignment. Any of us who sat through a yajna, even if you're not the yajamana, if you're just taking part, where Agni, and we will talk about the mystical fire as a closing idea as part of this talk as well. When Agni, it becomes the vehicle or the transmitter of your consciousness to the greatest forces, to our devas. What is really happening is the perfect alignment of manasa, vacha, karmana, and poetry or all art in the Indian tradition. Sri Aurobindo points us is basically recreation of that undisturbed harmony, and that is what gives poetry or any kind of word its timeless nature, and that is what is the divine and spiritual force that comes to us. He also is very particular about the matter of poetry. He does not leave you only with a philosophical, polemical idea. He actually talks to you about the content. The matter of poetry should move, stimulate, enlarge, heighten, or deepen feelings and emotions. This might appear naturally proximate to us, but we must recognize it is only because we are part of this culture. If you are part of any other culture where the purpose of art has been lost, my colleague Pankaj has written extensively about this in a 5-part series on the art and the artist, comparing the trajectory and evolution of art in the Western tradition versus art and the philosophy of art in the Indian tradition. We see that the artist is not in a maniacal rush to create something new. In fact, all artists and all art in India are retelling the same story. They are not imputing originality in terms of their creation. Their originality is only in terms of articulating it in a particular context. And that is also the structure of all of our great texts. Every text starts with the invocation, right up to the cosmology, and says we trace our origin back to Brahma or some other source of divine creation. Because great art is only possible through the spiritual element of submitting yourself. And that is what the Indian tradition does. It actually takes your ego and makes it productive. And that's where Sri Aurobindo is also asking us to locate art. Art is not to communicate meaninglessness. It is not another form like Dadaism or whatever forms that you can think of, where it becomes either an expression of nihilism or an expression of the unmitigated ego of the artist. Both of them are rejected in the Indian view. And in fact, Sri Aurobindo says this quite emphatically, that you're just simply not allowed to be rejected. That is not on. And once you just look at that, or if you ever come across that section, it just strikes you so profoundly, because it then fixes your life's purpose forever for you. Because it's simply not allowed. This whole trend that we're seeing today about depression, loneliness, this has a very profound social and contemporary cultural relevance. If your culture is goal setting you towards nihilism, or if your culture is telling you that there is no meaning, at least our philosophy has not found a meaning for existence, then by extension and by design, you will relapse into some kind of obsession with yourself. And everything becomes only a means to advance your strife. But Sri Aurobindo says, through our stumbling, we perfect the world. He doesn't really give us the allowance to end with strife. Says all strife is actually only to perfect the world. What can be a more beautiful, more profound, more emphatic call to action, call to life, than saying that we are imperfect, we are frail, but we have within us the spiritual potential, the adhyatmic potential to become not just perfect ourselves, but also perfect the world. And that is the goal that Sri Aurobindo sets when he talks about art and adhyatma. The perception of beauty, largeness, space, and increased horizons also evoke emotions in poetry. So he is all about expansion. It's all about making sure that our minds and lives expand. which is also, if I might just add, the inspiration behind calling our organization Brihat. It comes to us from Sri Aurobindo's idea of Satyam Brita Brihat, that there is the truth, there is the manifestation of the truth. And when the truth and the manifestation of the truth, in any context, it can be in an organization, it can be in a family, it can be in a nation, it can be in the community of nations or in universe as we see it. When the truth and the manifestation of the truth are together, when the manifestation represents and reflects the truth, then Brihat happens, then expansion happens. And in our current context, we see that there is a national civilizational culture that we have. But there are also a set of institutions, a set of inherited from a modern historical context, burdens that we have, which means that the truth of the culture and the representation or the manifestation of that truth is not yet fully synchronized. That is why the Brihat is not happening for Bharat. But we are going through a phase in my understanding and in my reading where we have the opportunity of a lifetime, of a century perhaps, to actually work on this vision that rishis have given, that this manifestation principle has to come closer to the truth principle. And when that happens, then we will really see Bharat's Brihat scope expanding, or at least that's the goal, or that's the direction, or that's the inspiration that we've taken from Sri Aurobindo. A quick dive into Sri Aurobindo's own poetry, which basically explains everything that I've been trying to talk about. This he composed, when he visited Kashmir and Adi Shankaracharya's shrine there. He says, "I walked on the highway seat of Solomon, where Shankaracharya's tiny temple stands, facing infinity from time's edge alone, on the bare ridge ending earth's vain romance. Around me was a formless solitude, all had become one strange, unnameable. All unborn soul reality, world new, topless and fathomless, forever still. A silence that was being's only word, the unknowing beginning and the voiceless end. Abolishing all things, movement seen or heard, or an incommunicable summit reigned, a lonely calm and void unchanging pace on the dumb crest of nature's mysteries." This is the mystical poetry invoking the philosophy of Advaita, which was a spontaneous outpouring when he visited and when he saw what he saw standing on that cliff. And that, if he were to just dwell on this, if he can receive it, if he can say it aloud, if he can allow the words to register through our senses, we get a sense of everything that he's talking about why poetry or word is a revolution, how that can pass through the instrument that we have as humans. And if we allow ourselves to become that perfect receptacle, and if we yearn and strive and endeavor towards that, how we can actually transmit it without any loss in the process of the transmission, where the para also becomes your vital, where the process and semiotic schools of communication which aim to manipulate the listener is not the pursuit, but the communication of the truth, the sadharanikarana of the truth, using poetry, using prose, becomes the very purpose of art. He also gives us to us, and this is personally for me, one of the reasons I absolutely revere Sri Aurobindo, apart from, of course, all the greatness, is that at the time that we are going through today, personally in my reading and for the work that we do at Brihat, the civilizational umbrella is extremely critical to understand. Yes, you have the spiritual principle that always is the highest. Yes, you have the artistic principle that is always the carrier of beauty. But we must also acknowledge and recognize that it is only under the umbrella of a civilization and the culture that makes up that civilization that a certain kind of spiritual pursuit, a certain kind of artistic pursuit is possible. And Sri Aurobindo, while he was the mystical force, he was the yogi of yogis, he was the creator of destiny for us in many ways, but he never ignored the times that he was in and the element of kshatra required to protect. In fact, his whole work is about that, about Bharat as Shakti. And here he invokes the might of Marathas, the work of Shivaji, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. The hero backward, silently with set and quiet faces, grim drew fighting back, the strong Marathas to their hills only. There, rare, sometimes with shouted slogan leaped at the pursuer's throat, or on some rise. Our covered vantage stayed the Mughal flood. A movement ever foremost where men fought was Baji Prabhu seen, like a wild wave of onset or a cliff against the surge. He is invoking that fundamental kshatriya in us using the art of poetry. That is also a dimension of spirituality. That is also something that all of us should take cognizance of. And when we, especially when we look to be communicators of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, it is also the element of Bhavani Bharati that comes to us from Sri Aurobindo's work. And that is the reflection that we see in this poem. Okay. So if you were to sum up his thoughts on the poetic expression of art and the link with spirituality, says that he himself gives us that definition. The substance, rhythm, form, words come down all together, ready formed from the plane of poetic creation. That is the perfect type of inspiration. It may give its own spontaneous gift, or it may give something which corresponds to the idea or the aspiration of the poet. It's very, very important to recognize this. It is the idea that is flowing through. If you allow it to flow through, then there is the beauty of full force. But in either case, the human being is only a channel or a receptacle. Although he feels the joy of the creation and the joy of avesha, or enthusiasm, or the idea of enthusiasm of creation, elation of the inrush and the passage. All of these are great. As artists, as creators, as as an ecosystem of creative institutions, that fundamental element of creation is Purushartha. The civilization and the knowledge system already gives us that. But the Purushartha fixes a certain hierarchy. There is a reason why Dharma precedes Artha and Kama, and why Moksha is the North Star. And that is what Sri Aurobindo reminds us, that when you talk about Kala in the Indian philosophy, in the Indian tradition, it is a perfection of the instrument to become a receptacle. He also has similar thoughts on prose. We don't have the time or the opportunity to go deep into it today. But it's the same vision that comes to us when he talks about the prose and why, or what constitutes a good prose. And he says the prose is judged by its ability to please, stimulate, and instruct the intellect. Great thoughts, beautiful descriptions, and noble narratives in prose can have a powerful impact on the soul, a direct link between the word of a creative pursuit and the adhyatmic or the spiritual dimension that it is supposed to evoke. Prose can create similar effects to poetry regarding emotions, but it doesn't have the same intrinsic connection to divine and spiritual aspects. So there is a certain potentiality for prose, but as the creator of Savitri, he's already given us a hierarchy. Prose can create similar effects as poetry, but it might not have the same element of divine rush. And we see this. If you cross from the Dasa tradition in Karnataka to the Bauls in Bengal to the Vachana or the Bhajana traditions that you have, you see that almost inextricably that spontaneous rush or the spontaneous recognition of the divine in us, there is a poetic expression. There is an automatic transmission of the truth in the form of poetry. And then, of course, you can also use your intellect to cognize it and write about it. But while it can give and serve that purpose, he does give us a hierarchy. Also, on literature and national art, there is a national character to art. Sri Aurobindo's entire work, if you look at Foundations of Indian Culture, was to defend and locate and position Indian culture and Indian art and respond to the kind of, quite frankly, degenerate commentary that was coming in from the West. Right? And so he takes us back to the actual source of our civilization. Says the ancients highly valued music, art, poetry, but modern society seems to have lost touch with their significance, focusing more on the materialistic pursuits and neglecting the deeper meaning of life. It says self-preservation through the equitable distribution of basic necessities like food, shelter, and clothing was efficiently achieved in ancient communistic societies, and without a similar system, a majority may become subservient to a privileged few. So he's bringing out the social consciousness, and this is very critical. I'll take a small detour here. Try and because I come into the discourse trying to look at the influence of culture as a macro and as a conduit for the civilizational wisdom, and how culture shapes everything that we do and everything that we don't do. There is today in the Indian discourse, obviously there is a renewed political consciousness. Hopefully that political consciousness leads to cultural consciousness. That's the area that we work in as our team at Brihat. And then that cultural consciousness should also lead us to the divine and spiritual recognitions. But there is a problem in the discourse where, because of the political institutions that we've given ourselves, and because of the structural element of colonial education still informing the national consciousness, we seem to invert the hierarchy between the social and the sacred. We seem to think that by pursuing the social agenda, we can recreate the sacred. And when we do that excessively, art and the possibility of reaching the divine through culture and art becomes to wane. Because the realm of social, as critical as it is actually in the Indian tradition. If you look at the Indian philosophy, we try and recreate as culture the patterns that we see in nature. Culture is created because the first order of nature has been broken. So we try and recreate the cultural patterns, whether it is and we look at the Indian civilizational mind, particularly the Hindu mind, is always about seeking the patterns. It's a pattern-seeking mind. So it seeks the patterns of the cosmos, of nature, of seasons, of cyclicality, of moods, of the sounds, and it seeks to recreate those patterns as rituals in our daily life. And because of a certain kind of education, we've come down to disparage rituals. But every single thing in the universe is a ritual. Bharat Gupta, in his book Indian Cultural Revival or Decline, talks about the ritual universe and how doesn't matter whether you believe in the sacred rituals or not, you will still create a certain ritual to make meaning of your own life, which is what August 15th is, which is what January 26th is, which is what any occasion where we come together to perform an action as a collective is. But the sustainable part of that, the real powerful part of it, the Shakti in it, is when the ritual is aligned with the sacred. When you try and invert the sequence, where you think that the social predominates or precedes the sacred, then basically from a yogic perspective, it's an investment into your aham, into your raga dvesha. You're not actually processing it through the higher realms for chitta shuddhi. That is where we must also look at culture and the social institutions and the discourse that is there. When you think about art and adhyatma, you cannot decouple that from culture and the kind of public governance and public narratives that are out there. So the current age's emphasis on material progress risks overshadowing the importance of cultural and artistic elements that contribute to human evolution and fulfillment. I really like us to reflect on this, because the spiritual pursuits, the personal pursuits, are in some ways, while of course sadhana is the most difficult thing, intellectual exposition is a part of that labor, and there is no substitute for that personal sadhana. But unless we are also able to look at it from the perch of culture and understand how culture sets the norms, directs behaviors, creates social interactions, which then have a feedback loop to what is valued, and then what becomes education, we will not realize Sri Aurobindo's vision of moving or making a cognitive shift from the emphasis on material progress or some kind of social discourse to the actual cultural and artistic dimensions that we need to absolutely have for human fulfillment. That is true. Every single Indian home has a piece of art. Does not matter what the material progress is. You go to even a small hut, you would see something beautiful, some space that they've sacralized. The entire civilizational mind, particularly in the core corpus of Hindu literature, is to actually sacralize the mundane. We enter into a relationship with the sacred and then organize things around it. The social comes out of it. The interdependency between people, between communities comes out of that. We create an institution like temple at the center, and everything comes to that. So this is something that we should interpret, and we should take from Sri Aurobindo's thoughts on art and adhyatma, that the fulfillment of that is not just a personal pursuit. It is a cultural collective pursuit, and that is critical for those of us who are in this dimension, to articulate, to talk about it, to be a voice of conscience when the society tries to invert the social and the sacred. On literature and national art, again, beautifully, he gives us the vision of yoga, that we use art and literature to reach a higher level. And once you reach that, that must set the culture to make sure that you don't once again come back, and we don't fall below. And this is, again, a profound understanding of human nature. Sri Aurobindo has done everything. He's given us Life Divine. He's given us synthesis of yoga. He's given us Gita's commentary. He's given us the poetic imagination in Savitri. He's given us every single tool or every single element that we need to actually make sure that we don't fall. But we are afraid. In our own experience, it must be true, at least in my personal experience, it is true, that you might reach that momentary recognition or that element of nobility, but it's very, very hard to preserve that. And that is where Sri Aurobindo cautions us that once you reach there, it is your duty to strive to hold that up. And that means you need to have a cultivated spirit and to make sure that art and the pursuit of art is not just about aesthetic. Aesthetic is the entry point to make sure that the joy creates the psychological and the motivational force. The intellectual understanding is educative to make sure that you're able to cognize and bring it into behavior. But the third and highest dimension of this is spiritual. So use of poetry, prose, or whatever piece of art in Sri Aurobindo's vision is the idea of Chitta Shuddhi. And he further talks about Ananda, that the world itself emerges from Ananda, and its Laya, the entire play, happens in Ananda. One way to look at the triple manifestation of Ananda is love, joy, and beauty. Climbing on this unalloyed bliss, mankind should climb the road to God. So that Satchidananda is the highway, and he is urging mankind to take that highway to that unalloyed bliss that he talks about. And I'll end with a couple of things. And I'm very nervous to even test this because I have no way of understanding yet in my own level of Chitta Shuddhi the genius and the mystical magnificence of Savitri. But we can always set an aspiration for ourselves. Of course, it's a story. He is alluding to the story of Princess Savitri, the daughter of King Ashwapati, a prince who marries a prince named Satyava, prophesies to die early, and just the sheer spiritual force that Savitri was made even Yama change the nature's law, right? And there was a debate on that. So what is the allegory? What is the metaphor? He is in a dialogue and communion with the divine. And Sri Aurobindo is shaping the force or the trajectory or the direction of the divine. He is negotiating with the divine. He is asking for the divine to become a bit more accessible, at the same time preparing the consciousness at a planetary level for us to receive it. So Sri Aurobindo, like I said, he is not just at the cusp of different civilizations talking to each other and therefore guiding it at a much bigger level. And that is why Sri Aurobindo is always about future. He is standing and he is always positioned at the cusp of the transmission from the lower to the higher, from the human to the divine. And he is trying to negotiate on both sides to make this meet. And that is his life's work. And that is how we should approach or understand Savitri. And it is the epic of our unfulfilled potentialities. It is the exploration of the deepest issues, cosmic existence and beyond. It is also the greatest philosophical poem of world literature, in my view. Although so much of Savitri deals with inner experience and other planes of existence, the message is vital, the message is visceral, the message is urgent, and it's immediate. It is a phenomenal psycho-spiritual work for our own evolution. Here, Sri Aurobindo Savitri triumphs because of the spiritual force that is incarnate in her over everything that represses even death. And Savitri became a metaphor, the poem became a metaphor for the civilization of Bharata, which can never die, which always has to be about the future, which always has to become the world mother. And the world mother can never take rest. Right? That is the idea in which we look at Savitri. And before that is the idea of course, the spiritual force that is inherent in us. But how do we conduct this idea? Sri Aurobindo once again gives us the clue, he gives us the master key, and he talks about the mystical force in his great work, Hymns to Mystic Fire. Agni first, but without him, the sacrificial flame cannot burn on the altar of the soul. That flame Agni is the seven-term power of the will, the force of God instant with knowledge. This conscious and forceful will is the immortal guest in our mortality pure priest, and a divine worker, the mediator between earth and heaven. This is, of course, he's giving us the entire Vedic yajna in one passage. It carries what we offer to the higher power and brings back in return their full force or force and light to enjoy into our humanity. Therefore, in Hymns to Mystic Fire, is just talking about Jati Vedas, the knower of all births. It is the manifestation of all phenomena. And it is the place of Agni as the immortal place in the world of mortals. The hymns carry a profound inner meaning that remains intertwined with yogic aspirations. And therefore, the poem itself, when we talk about Kala and Adhyatma, we go and approach Hymns to Mystic Fire, we see all of that unfolding right in front of our eyes. They guide us to merge life and yoga in perfect harmony, culmination in the integration of bhakti, jnana, and karma, or the panchakosha, or all avasthas. Approach it from wherever your preferred vantage point is. But Sri Aurobindo, like I said, will take you to the other side. And in conclusion, I can just say Sri Aurobindo's view suggests poetry, art, and any form of art reflects divine and spiritual elements when they express emotions and sensations harmoniously. What is this harmony? It is the harmony between the para and the vaikari. The genuine blending of matter and verse in poetry or matter and presentation in art reveals a deeper connection to the spiritual realm. There is no art, there is no kala without adhyatma in the Bharatiya Drishti. And Sri Aurobindo makes no subtle signaling at this. He is very, very forceful, very clear. The divine aspect of art and poetry lies in the natural and destined unity of expression that goes beyond mere skill and aesthetics. Beauty and aesthetic is a means for us to sublimate and transcend and become one with that spiritual force. So lastly, life is made up of 8 rasas, and of course there is the 9th rasa, karuna. The movement of heart and its enjoyment and in its own and of that others may either be directed downwards, as is the case with the animals and animal men, to the mere satisfaction of 10 sense organs and the vital desires which make instruments of the senses in the average sensual man, or they make work for the satisfaction of the heart itself in a predominantly emotional enjoyment of life, or they may be directed through the medium of the intellect, rational, intuitional, to attainment of delight, through the seizing of the source of all delight, the spirit, which is the Satyam, Sundaram, Anandam, which is beyond and around the source and basis of all this worldwide activity, evolution, and progress. That is the message of Kala and Adhyatma together that Sri Aurobindo gives us. I want to thank Kiranji, the entire team at Auro University and every other institution which is directing this work of bringing this vision back into public discourse. I know I am a ill-equipped small medium to transmit this magnificent message, but my support and my satisfaction of what I see happening here through this effort is unbounded. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Raghavji. I think every time, whenever I listen to you, I feel like there is so much, left behind to read and study and do some research. It is so deep perspective you bring, as well as it doesn't only, deepen the thought process, but it opens up, it widens up. That is so beautiful way you always bring. Particularly, I really loved, because I feel connected when you give example of real life situation. It is not easy to understand Sri Aurobindo's perspective only, through words. Actually, you have to really dive deep into it to understand. But when you talked about the sacred ritual places, it starts from where you talked about collective community, collective consciousness in a way. It touched my heart, because that is what we are actually. I can connect it with very well, because from the birth of us and our family, particularly the way we are born and brought up, every part somewhere or other way we are doing that. And actually you brought that awareness, and it lightened up that perspective very well. That is so beautiful. I think this kind of talk not only helps me as a kind of seeker, but student would certainly love to listen to this kind of talk, because almost we are kind of untouched, that we are almost not able to touch these aspects. So I'm really greatly thankful to you that you accepted the invitation and came over here. And I think I would really love to read your article rather than just listen to the talk, because it is each kind of if I put it as an article, each paragraph is intense, Raghavji. Beautiful. I'm really thankful. Thank you so much.
That's your grace. Thank you so much. And I would love to, any opportunity to bring this to students. And I use, like I said, culture as the vehicle. We have to explain the world that students live in. And we have to help them understand that what is animating them today. We have to give them the moral agency. They are animated because they have a moral imagination. But unfortunately, because of the culture and the system that we have, they do not have access to the means to harness that moral imagination towards a productive purpose. And therefore, that gets hijacked into performative, feel-good, trivial things. And that is why we should be on the forefront talking to students that you have a moral inheritance. You have a very empathetic inheritance. You have ancestors who were really, really empathetic. They created this beauty for you. Right? That sense of gratitude, I think, is the purpose of education that we should have.
Beautiful. Yes. Beluji, please.
Yeah, no, I was just so immersed in everything. And I think, like one word that came to me, Raghavji, like soul brother, like today you were really channeling these things, thoughts that were there at the top of my head, because like I said to you in the beginning, we are having this, this institution called SAKAR, Aurobindo Center for Advanced Research, is hosting a 3-day festival, like a celebration Sri Aurobindo. And today the focus was, the panel that I was moderating was on Indian culture. And the title was Indian Culture, Its March to a Greater Dawn.
Wonderful.
I started off
I was aware of that, but it's so...
Yeah, so I started off with this whole thing of like, what's the greater dawn that Sri Aurobindo has brought in, and connecting it to his writings in Foundations of Indian Culture, where he actually uses this phrase, a greater dawn, in a very, uplifting, elevating sort of way, that, the night is there, but there is greater dawn coming, wait. And then, of course, the supermind comes, the greater dawn. That's how I connected the story. But in a way to show, how are we marching towards the greater dawn? Taking the greater dawn to a noon of the future. We had in the panel Anuradha Chaudhary talking of Indian knowledge systems. What's the work going on with Indian knowledge systems? So it was exactly what you were describing. And I was thinking, oh my God, just today, I was so absorbed in that.
Anuradha is a dear friend, of course. So I'm not surprised. We always...
She's an ashram ex-student. So we had, and Devdeep was there, then, the greater dawn into the India and India in the world, India's role in the world. And then we have an historian, talking about how our history has been taught all in a wrong sort of way. So what's the new direction? So it's just so fascinating that today we had you for this session. So I was just kind of really amazed at how Mother makes it happen. So my absorption is continuing there. Just a few points I noted that I would like to just share, and then a quick question. I I think you mentioned about synthesis of yoga. I think another vantage point is again Vedic Vedantic and Tantric, the two streams that he also brings up something. Again, another interesting coincidence. Today, I happened to run into a dancer who we had invited last year to perform what? Baji Prabhu.
Ah.
And after years, I went into ashram dining room and she's there volunteering. I said, oh, wow. So again, the Baji Prabhu connection can come up so distinct. But my question is about the one point you mentioned. Maybe it was like a point in passing, but it seemed very intriguing to me. The social media discourse, again, there is a lot of performance there, just the narrative wars, a lot of ego, my people, my country, my civilization. How does it find that its origin in that process school of theory of communication after World War II? If you have a minute or so in which you can elaborate, or I know we are a little beyond, but it's
no,
still
that's okay.
intriguing to me.
Think of it as the collective psyche. Once institutions adopt a certain stance, in this case, the state institutions, the state media, and also, therefore, by extension, education. And so that becomes curriculum, that becomes the way knowledge is perceived. Right after World War II, this entire process school of communication was set up or conceived as, how do you manipulate the listener? What should be the, so it was very political in nature. Communication and the whole art of communication was sort of subsumed towards and exclusively for political purposes. So you have media, you have the evolution of the technology around media, all of that coming from that school of education, that it is a media narrative. It is a certain manipulation of the conscience of the public that you should aim for, and there is a moral logic to it because they've given themselves the role of civilizing the world. So the advent of social media, while we feel that it has democratized communication, it will invariably, and it has, we are seeing this in our own experience, has become a weapon. It has been weaponized because communication, the theory of communication itself is manipulation. So if we were to, for example, if we were to design a social media organization, what is the philosophy that we would have? Our design will be informed by the idea of whether something is increasing your raga dvesha, or if it is actually helping that go into manas buddhi and chitta, right? Similarly, what is the philosophy of communication for an Indian discourse or Indian technology? It should be, how does this technology help you become a better receptacle? How does it help you reduce the distortion between para, pashyanti, madhyama, and vaikari? That is not there. So what I mean by social media and how the process school has distorted and created this war is that once knowledge is established and discipline evolves around it, educational departments come up, curriculum comes up, and that becomes the means of transmitting from one generation to another. The collective psyche itself and the way it creates technology, the way it looks at different instruments is already assembled and directed towards that kind of weaponization.
But it's interesting you mentioned that if an organization like Brihat or any organization that is rooted in Indian view of communication, Indian theory of communication, and the four layers from para to vaikari would look at it differently. But again, the question would be whether an Indic rooted organization would feel the need for such kind of communication.
We will have to, I think awareness is the first point of action. We will have to first analyze this. And that is why the knowledge system discourse is so important, Beluji. Because unless you know that there is something called a para to vaikari, unless you know that there is a philosophical school of communication, if you go to a media school today, you will study process and semiotics school, right? If you go to a media organization, you will use this as a prime time, rate generating assembly line production, right? So how do you have an alternate imagination if you don't have access to the knowledge system? That is why education is so critical, because that is the force multiplier. That is the generator function. So I would say the challenge, of course, is immediate and humongous, but the response to that is, reclaiming some parts of our education, connecting it to Indian knowledge systems. So for example, one action that we can take is how does the Indian knowledge system of communication, how does Natya Shastra become the source text for media studies?
Beautiful.
That is a specific action item that can happen.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Very good.
Raghavji, I think it leads me to the question where, when you were talking about these layers of communication, para to Vaikri, I think how to bring into the curriculum, because it is like, it becomes like philosophical only. It does not practically, people, they remain untouched.
It will have, in fact, a lot of our work is on that. In fact, I'm taking this call from Nagpur. I'm here as part of a initiative by the IKS division in Ministry of Education, which is training 1,000 faculties on introducing them to Indian knowledge systems. We now have a UGC guideline that Indian knowledge systems related curriculum should be part of it. So there is a policy. I look at it 5 levels, Kiranji. I look at it as the policy, which is the air cover. That has to be there. And we have to keep providing that feedback to the policymakers. That's why a lot of my work is focused there. Second is academic leadership. Somebody has to take the leap of faith and say, we will introduce this. It will take 2-3 years. That's okay. That's fine. Transformation will take time, but it is there. And your best students will gravitate towards it. And once they gravitate and once they become successful, that is when mimicking process happens. That is when 100 other students are inspired to mimic that success. So we need to generate role models from within the student fraternity. You also need to connect with the industry and say, you should have a bias to employ people or have job descriptions that say, we prefer people from an Indian knowledge system background.
Yeah.
We should talk to parents and we should tell them, please understand the importance of this for your own family's sake, not for anything else. You want a harmonious child so that whatever wealth you have created does not get spoiled, right?
Yeah.
And lastly, students, young students, we have to talk to them about the aspiration for this. We have to, like I said, they have the moral imagination. We can't give up on them. Yes. But that moral imagination cannot be so easily hijacked. Yeah. Today, what's happening is, because it is so hijacked, it is having a second order effect of polluting the Prakriti itself, which means the psyche is easier to get captured. We will have to arrest that slide.
Today somebody from a design background was talking about how every ad agencies knows the power of repetition.
Yeah.
And the idea of, if we can use that and emphasize in our classrooms the idea of Naam Japa.
Yeah,
and
of mantra.
Now repetition can be a means to, do the Chitta Shuddhi or get into the stable, calm state of consciousness. I mean, again, so they have taken up, the marketing people have taken up and we have forgotten. So it was very interesting.
I think, Beluji, the best part is right now, luckily I have Ashima Arora from Design School and Papri Das ji from IT School. Actually, their students, they are so much connected. Some of the students, they are working very closely with, Science of Living program and they are designing app and everything. But when I talk to them personally at, one-to-one level, they want to understand. It is, that is why I asked this question that, how to integrate in such a way that students, they don't feel, because modern, and it is a very, very different kind of atmosphere has created that modern and traditional. Unfortunately, Indian knowledge system is traditional. But the students, when we talk them one-to-one, they are really, they are keen to learn what we are talking about. And they are.
And we can, Kiranji, that coming from a design kind of experience with games and everything, use that words to first capture their attention and then direct it towards the knowledge systems. So, I mean, the answer to how it can happen is we first need to create the people who can communicate this. It has to be through the faculty, through the teachers.
Right. I think there is one more question. Let us take, and Siddharji wants to speak.
Sure.
Unmute yourself, Siddharji. And
hi, Siddharth here. First of all, thank you so much, Raghavji. I think you contributed my sadhana in different ways as well, because I was a big fan of your EA Sports FIFA product as well. So for many years, use that. But anyway, coming to Sri Aurobindo, for example, I moved out of my MBA 5 years back. So I would say, there is a big stark difference in how it goes on in programs in, let's say, IIMs and IITs, and compared to now what your organization is doing. It really took intense force from the mother and Sri Aurobindo to bring me from that process into just, this kind of Indic, Vedic kind of rooted process in just living daily. So I guess as somebody like who's like 29 years old right now and still really working in the for-profit, shareholder-driven restaurant thing, of course, I feel like inwardly I can contribute by centering myself and bringing my inspiration in. But also, is there any more things that somebody like me could contribute in your work?
I think we should not have this distinction between I'm working for profit and therefore can I. That's why I said the label or the sort of construct for us is culture. And culture is a co-creation process that all of us are engaging in every day. Whenever you speak, whenever you represent, whenever you reject, whenever you accept, all of that is a part of socialization through which culture engenders, right? So if you make more conscious choices, you're already partaking and generating a better culture from India, right? How do you advance your contribution to that, right? One is, of course, writing about it, talking about it, representing, shaping the minds. At Brihat, our idea is actually for people who want to do this, and I keep getting a lot of these things, to have accessible pathways for self-authoring. So we have an entire framework that we've created called the Swayambodh, Shatrubodh, Saundaryabodh, which is for us to firstly become settled with whatever we are doing in this, right? While we're because this process of representing an idea, not personally, but culturally, is a very tricky process. You attach your identity to it, and then you realize that, either a thinker that you really idolized or an organization that you like invariably says something or does something that you don't agree with. And therefore that hurts your identity. And in a social media world, you are reminded of that, right? And therefore it becomes a very painful process to this one. So the first step after this cognitive shift has happened is for you to chart your own self-authoring journey, reading diversely. Like I said, you need to understand the civilizational dimension. It's very important. A lot of spiritual discourse happens in a vacuum without understanding that there is the umbrella of civilization. It is in Bharatavarsha that this can happen. Sri Aurobindo was very clear on it. In fact, he said you should have a buffer state between China and Bharat. He predicted the China trajectory. So, right, he was not. That's the thing. Our rishis were very clear. So we should get to that. So we should develop the civilizational view, and then the automatic process of that engagement will give you the expression. Whether it can be, it'll be a writing, it'll be a course, and that's where we would want to handhold. If you want to write, we'd be happy to publish. If you want to do a course, tell us what it is about. We can work together. The whole idea is that we want to create many, many opportunities for young people who want to do civilizational work and live well. That needs tremendous capital accumulation, that needs tremendous intellectual accumulation, spiritual force as the Adhara, all of those things, but that is work in progress. That's what we're aiming to do.
Right. One last thing. So recently, ever since I came across Aurobindo 2 years back, and I would say he kind of introduced himself to me and pulled me in. I wouldn't take any credit for, because there was a phase when I read his material, which nothing happened. Like it was nothing. And in the same material I'm reading, something else is happening. So I knew clearly there was some big shift happened. So because of that inspiration, I tend to not express myself unless it is coming totally from the source, right? Because anything else feels like a egoic, a sneaky little vital impulse coming in. So I just wanted to see how I can open myself. I think I saw one of your quotes in your this thing that it can open up the consciousness more as you taking inner inspiration. So it's also like a inner work to express from the source. So any words on that?
It is always the work on the instrument. That is the Indian philosophy, right? The ownership and the agency is always with that. That is where a ritual helps. Having your own writing ritual where you have a sacralized space, where you create and you enter into a compact with that sacred space. And this happens, smallest of places in our house, you see, there is a small place for the God. And your behavior in that place is very different.
Right.
So it's about creating that. And this is the civilizational way. They create the tirtha, the kshetra, so that we can go into that level of consciousness. So conscious, deliberative, daily practice in a sacralized atmosphere. Not just us, even Joseph Campbell, the creative force from the Western world also says the same thing. It's just that he doesn't have a spiritual tradition to call it sadhana. He's intellectualizing it.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Raghavji.
Thank you
And
so much.
we took
Thank you.
your time, but it is worth listening to you. And we'll, again, look forward for this kind of discourse, maybe in a different topics.
I look forward to always being in touch and contributing whatever I can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice. We'll be in touch again.
Thank you. Nice to be in touch with you.
Yeah.
And I thank all the participants over here. They even this odd hours after working hours, they are all here listening. Today we have many people from Auro University also. So I'm thankful to them also. Thank you so much. Thank you, Raghav.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Namaste.
Good night.